Section 13 of the Public Orations of Demosthenes. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Public Orations of Demosthenes, translated by Arthur Wallace Pickard, on the Embassy, Part 3. Now consider the decree which Philocrates proposed and handed in. An excellent resolution it sounds, as you hear it now. But when you take into account the occasion on which it was proposed, and the promises which Aeschines was then making, you will see that their action amounts to nothing less than a surrender of the Phocians to Philip and the Thebans, and that, practically, with their hands tied behind their backs. To the clerk. Read the decree. The decree is read. There, men of Athens, is the decree, overflowing with expressions of gratitude and auspicious language. The peace, it says, which is granted to Philip, shall be granted on the same terms to his descendants, and also the alliance. Again, we are to thank Philip for his promised acts of justice. Yet Philip made no promises. So far was he from making promises that he said he did not know what he could do to gratify you. It was Aeschines who spoke in his name and made the promises. Then Philocrates took advantage of the enthusiasm which Aeschines' words aroused in you to insert in the decree the clause, "And unless the Phocians act as they are bound, and surrender the temple to the Amphictyons, the Athenian people will render their assistance against those who still stand in the way of such surrender." Thus, men of Athens, at a time when you were still at home and had not taken the field, when the Spartans had foreseen the deception and retired, and when none of the Amphictyons were on the spot but the Thessalians and Thebans, he proposed in the most innocent-sounding language in the world that they shall deliver up the temple to these, for he proposes that they shall deliver it up to the Amphictyons. But what Amphictyons? For there were none there but the Thessalians and Thebans. He does not propose that the Amphictyons should be convoked, or that they should wait until the Amphictyons met, or that Proxenus should render assistance in Phocis, or that the Athenians should take the field, or anything of that sort. Philip did indeed actually send 2 letters to summon you, but he did not intend you really to march from Athens, not a bit of it. For he would not have waited to summon you until he had seen the time go by in which you could have set out, nor would he have tried to prevent me when I wished to set sail and return hither, nor would he have instructed Aeschines to speak to you in the terms which would be least likely to cause you to march. No, he intended that you should fancy that he was about to fulfill your desires, and in that belief should abstain from any resolutions adverse to him, and that the Phocians should, in consequence, make no defence or resistance in reliance upon any hopes inspired by you, but should put themselves into his hands in utter despair. To the clerk. Read to the jury the letters of Philip. The letters are read. Now these letters summon you, and that, forsooth, instantly, and it was surely for Aeschines and his party, if the proceeding was in any way genuine, to support the summons, to urge you to march, and to propose that Proxenus, whom they knew to be in those parts, should render assistance at once. Yet it is plain that their action was of precisely the opposite character, and naturally so, for they did not attend to the terms of the letter, but to the intention with which Philip wrote it. With this intention they cooperated, and to this they strove to give effect. As soon as the Phocians had learned the news of your proceedings in the assembly, and had received this decree of Philocrates, and heard the defendant's announcements and his promises, everything combined to effect their doom. Consider the circumstances. There were some of them who had the wisdom to distrust Philip. These were induced to trust him. And why? Because they believed that even if Philip were trying to deceive them 10 times over, The ambassadors of Athens, at least, would never dare to deceive their own countrymen. This report which Aeschines had made to you must therefore be true. It was the Thebans, and not themselves, whose hour had come. There were others who advocated resistance at all hazards. But these too were weakened in their resolution, now that they were persuaded that they could count upon Philip's favour, and that unless they did as they were bidden, you, whose assistance they were hoping for, would march against them. There was also a third party, who thought that you repented of having made the peace with Philip. But to these they pointed out that you had decreed that the same peace should hold good for posterity also, so that on every ground all assistance from you was despaired of. That is why they crowded all these points into one decree, and in this lies, I think, the very greatest of all their crimes against you, to have made a peace with a mortal man whose power was due to the accidents of the moment, a peace whereby they covenanted that the disgrace brought upon the city should be everlasting, to have robbed the city not only of all beside, but even of the benefits that fortune might hereafter bestow, to have displayed such superabundant villainy as to have done this wicked wrong, not only to their countrymen now living, but also to all those who should ever thereafter be born. Is it not utterly atrocious? And this last clause, by which the peace was extended to your descendants, you would certainly never have allowed to be added to the conditions of peace, had you not then placed your trust in the promises announced by Aeschines, as the Phocians placed their trust in them and perished. For, as you know, they delivered themselves up to Philip. They gave their cities into his hands, and the consequences which befell them were the exact opposite of all that Aeschines had predicted to you. That you may realize plainly that this calamity was brought about in the manner that I have described, and that they are responsible for it, I will go through the dates at which each separate event occurred, and if anyone can contradict me on any point, I invite him to rise and speak in the time allotted to me. The peace was made on the 19th of Elaphebolion, and we were away on the mission which was sent to receive the oaths 3 whole months. All this time the Phocians remained unharmed. We returned from that mission on the 13th of Scyrophorion. Philip had already appeared at the Thermopylae, and was making promises to the Phocians, none of which they believed, as is proved, when you consider that otherwise they would not have appealed to you. Then followed the assembly, at which, by their falsehoods and by the deception which they practised upon you, Aeschines and his party ruined the whole cause. That was on the 16th of Scyrophorion. Now I calculate that it was on the 5th day that the report of your proceedings reached the Phocians. For the Phocians' envoys were here on the spot, and were deeply concerned to know what report these men would make, and what your resolution would be. That gives us the 20th as the date on which, as we calculate, the Phocians heard of your proceedings. For, counting from the 16th, the 20th is the 5th day. Then followed the 21st, the 22nd, and the 23rd. On the latter day the truce was made, and the ruin of the Phocians was finally sealed. This can be proved as follows. On the 27th you were holding an assembly in the Piraeus to discuss the business connected with the dockyards, when Dercylus arrived from Chalcis with the news that Philip had put everything into the hands of the Thebans, and that this was the 5th day since the truce had been made. 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th. The 27th is the 5th day precisely. Thus the dates and their reports and their proposals, everything, in short, convicts them of having cooperated with Philip, and of sharing with him the responsibility for the overthrow of the Phocians. Again, the fact that none of the towns in Phocis was taken by siege or by an attack in force, and that the utter ruin of them all was a direct consequence of their truce with Philip, affords the strongest evidence that it was the belief inspired in the Phocians by these men that they would be preserved from destruction by Philip, which was the cause of their fate. Philip himself they knew well enough. To the clerk, bring me our treaty of alliance with the Phocians, and the decrees under which they demolished their walls. To the jury, you will then realize what were the relations between themselves and you, upon which they relied, and what nevertheless was the fate which befell them through the action of these accursed men. To the clerk, read. The treaty of alliance between the Athenians and Phocians is read. These then were the things for which they relied upon you: friendship, alliance, and assistance. Now listen to what befell them, because Aeschines prevented your going to their assistance. To the clerk, read. The agreement between Philip and the Phocians is read. You hear it, men of Athens, an agreement between Philip and the Phocians. It runs, not between the Thebans and the Phocians, nor the Thessalians and the Phocians, nor the Locrians, nor any one else who was there. Again, the Phocians shall deliver up their cities to Philip, not to the Thebans or Thessalians or any one else. And why? Because the defendant's report to you was that Philip had crossed the pass with a view to the preservation of the Phocians. Thus it was Aeschines in whom all their trust was placed. It was with him in their minds that they considered the whole situation. It was with him in their minds that they made the peace. To the clerk. Now read the remainder. To the jury. And do you observe for what they trusted him, and what treatment they received? Does it show any resemblance or similarity to what Aeschines predicted in his report? To the clerk. Read on. The decrees of the Amphictyons are read. Men of Athens, the horror and the immensity of this calamity have never been surpassed in our day in the Hellenic world, nor even, I believe, in the time before us. Yet these great and dreadful events a single man has been given power to bring about, by the action of these men, while the city of Athens was still in being, Athens, whose traditional policy is to stand as the champion of the Hellenic peoples, and not to suffer anything like this to take place. The nature of the ruin which the unhappy Phocians have suffered may be seen, not only from these decrees, but also from the actual results of the action taken. And an awful and piteous sight it is, men of Athens. For when recently we were on our way to Delphi, we could not help seeing it all, houses razed to the ground, cities stripped of their walls, the land destitute of men in their prime, only a few poor women and little children left, and some old men in misery. Indeed, no words can describe the distress now prevailing there. Yet this was the people, I hear you all saying, that once gave its vote against the Thebans, when the question of your enslavement was laid before them. What then, men of Athens, do you think would be the vote, what the sentence that your forefathers would give, if they could recover consciousness, upon those who were responsible for the destruction of this people? I believe that if they stoned them to death with their own hands, they would hold themselves guiltless of blood. Is it not utterly shameful? Does it not, if possible, go beyond all shame, that those who saved us then, and gave the saving vote for us, should now have met with a very opposite fate through these men, suffering as no Hellenic people has ever suffered before, with none to hinder it? Who then is responsible for this crime? Who is the author of this deception? Who but Aeschines? Of all the many reasons for which Philip might be congratulated with good cause upon his fortune, the chief ground of congratulation is a piece of good fortune to which, by every heavenly power, I cannot find any parallel in our days. To have captured great cities, to have reduced a vast expanse of territory to subjection, and all similar actions are, of course, enviable and brilliant achievements, undeniably so. but many other persons might be mentioned who had achieved as much. The good fortune of which I am about to speak is peculiar to Philip, and has never been given to any other. It is this, that when he needed scoundrels to do his work for him, he found even greater scoundrels than he wanted. For as such we have surely good reason to think of them. For when there were falsehoods, which Philip himself, in spite of the immense interests which he had at stake, did not dare to utter on his own behalf, which he did not set down in any of his letters, and which none of his envoys uttered, these men sold their services for the purpose, and undertook your deception. Antipater and Parmenio, servants of a master as they were, and unlikely even to find themselves in your presence again, none the less secured for themselves that they should not be the instruments in your deception, while these men, who were Athenians, citizens of the most free city, and held an official position as your ambassadors, though they would have to meet you and look you in the face, and pass the remainder of their lives among you, and render before you an account of their actions, they, I say, undertook the task of deceiving you. How could vileness or desperation go further than this? But I would have you understand further that he is under your curse, and that you cannot, without violation of religion and piety, acquit him when he has thus lied to you. To the clerk, recite the curse. Take it from me and read it out of the law. The curse is read. This imprecation is pronounced in your name, men of Athens, by the herald, at every meeting of the assembly, as the law appoints, and when the council sits, it is pronounced again there. Nor can Aeschines say that he did not know it well. He was your under-clerk and servant to the council, and used himself to read this law over to the herald. Surely, then, you will have done a strange and monstrous thing, men of Athens, if today, when you have it in your power, you should fail to do for yourselves the thing which you enjoin upon the gods, or rather claim from them as your due, and should acquit a man whom you pray to the gods to destroy utterly, himself, his race, and his house. You must not do this. You may leave it to the gods to punish one whom you cannot yourselves detect. But when you have yourselves caught the criminal, you must no longer lay the task of punishing him upon the gods. Now I am told that he intends to carry his shamelessness and impudence so far as to avoid all mention of his own proceedings, his report, his promises, the deception he has practiced upon the city, as though his trial were taking place before strangers, instead of before you, who know all the facts, and that he intends to accuse first the Spartans, then the Phocians, and then Hegesippus. That is mere mockery, or rather, it is atrocious shamelessness. For all that he will allege today against the Phocians or the Spartans or Hegesippus, their refusal to receive Proxenus, their impiety, let him allege what he will. All these allegations refer, as you know, to actions which were already past when these ambassadors returned to Athens, and which were no obstacle to the preservation of the Phocians. The admission is made by whom? By the defendant Aeschines himself. For what was his report on that occasion? Not that if it had not been for the refusal to receive Proxenus, nor that if it had not been for Hegesippus, nor that if it had not been for such and such things, the Phocians would have been saved. No, he discarded all such qualifications, and stated expressly that before he returned he had persuaded Philip to save the Phocians, to repeople Boeotia, and to arrange matters to suit your convenience, that within 2 or 3 days these things would be accomplished facts, and that for this reason the Thebans had set a price upon his head. Refuse then to hear or to tolerate any mention of what had already been done, either by the Spartans or by the Phocians, before he made his report, and do not let him denounce the rascality of the Phocians. It was not for their virtue that you once saved the Spartans, nor the Euboeans, that accursed people, nor many others, but because the interests of the city demanded their preservation, as they demanded that of the Phocians just now. And what wrong was done either by the Phocians, or by the Spartans, or by yourselves, or by anyone else in the world after he made those declarations to prevent the fulfillment of the promises which he then made? Ask him that, for that is what he will not be able to show you. It was within 5 days. 5 days and no more, that Aeschines made his lying report, that you believed him, that the Phocians heard of it, surrendered themselves, and perished. This, I think, makes it as plain as it can possibly be that the ruin of the Phocians was the result of organized deceit and trickery, and of nothing else. For so long as Philip was unable to proceed to Phocis on account of the peace, and was only waiting in readiness to do so, he kept sending for the Spartans, promising to do all that they wished, in order that the Phocians might not win them over to their side by your help. But when he had arrived at Thermopylae, and the Spartans had seen the trap and retired, he now sent Aeschines in advance to deceive you, in order that he might not, owing to your perceiving that he was playing into the hands of the Thebans, find himself once more involved in loss of time and war and delay through the Phocians defending themselves and your going to their assistance, but might get everything into his power without a struggle. And this is what has in fact happened. Do not then let the fact that Philip deceived the Spartans and Phocians, as well as yourselves, enable Aeschines to escape his punishment for deceiving you. That would not be just. But if he tells you that, to compensate for the Phocians and Thermopylae and all your other losses, you have retained possession of the Chersonese, do not, in heaven's name, accept the plea. Do not tolerate the aggravation of all the wrong that you have suffered through his conduct as ambassador. By the reproach which his defence would bring upon the city, the reproach of having sacrificed the existence of your allies, in an underhand attempt to save part of your own possessions. You did not act thus, for when the peace had already been made, and the Chersonese was no longer in danger, there followed 4 whole months, during which the Phocians remained unharmed, and it was not until after these that the lying statements of Aeschines brought about their ruin by deceiving you. And further, you will find that the Chersonese is in much greater danger now than it was then. For when do you think that we had the greatest facilities for punishing Philip for any trespass against the Chersonese? Before he stole any of these advantages from the city, or now? For my part, I think we had far greater facilities then. What then does this retention of the Chersonese amount to, when all the fears and the risks which attended one who would have liked to attack it have been removed? Again, I am told that he will express himself to some such effect as this, that he cannot think why he is accused by Demosthenes, and not by any of the Phocians. It is better that you should hear the true state of the case from me beforehand. Of the exiled Phocians, the best, I believe, and the most respectable, after being driven into banishment and suffering, as they have suffered, are content to be quiet, and none of them would consent to incur an enmity which would fall upon himself on account of the calamities of his people, while those who would do anything for money have no one to give it to them. For assuredly I would never have given anyone anything whatever to stand by my side here and cry aloud how cruelly they have suffered. The truth and the deeds that have been done cry aloud of themselves. And as for the Phocian people, they are in so evil and pitiable a plight that there is no question for them of appearing as accusers at the examination of every individual ambassador in Athens. They are in slavery, in mortal fear of the Thebans and of Philip's mercenaries, whom they are compelled to support, broken up into villages as they are, and stripped of their arms. Do not then suffer him to urge such a plea. Make him prove to you that the Phocians are not ruined, or that he did not promise that Philip would save them. For the questions upon which the examination of an ambassador turns are these: What have you effected? What have you reported? If the report is true, you may be acquitted. If it is false, you must pay the penalty. How can you plead the non-appearance of the Phocians, when it was you yourself, I fancy, that brought them, so far as it lay in your power, into such a condition that they could neither help their friends nor repel their enemies? And further, apart from all the shame and the dishonour in which also these proceedings are involved, it is easy to show that in consequence of them the city has been beset with grave dangers as well. Every one of you knows that it was the hostilities which the Phocians were carrying on, and their command of Thermopylae, that rendered us secure against Thebes, and made it impossible that either Philip or the Thebans should ever march into the Peloponnese, or into Euboea, or into Attica. But this guarantee of safety which the city possessed, arising out of the position of Thermopylae and the actual circumstances of the time, you were induced to sacrifice by the deception and the lying statements of these ambassadors, a guarantee, I say, fortified by arms, by a continuous campaign, by great cities of allies, and by a wide tract of territory, and you have looked on while it was swept away. Fruitless has your first expedition to Thermopylae become, an expedition made at a cost of more than 200 talents, if you include the private expenditure of the soldiers, and fruitless your hopes of triumph over Thebes. But of all the wicked services which he has done for Philip, let me tell you of that which is in reality the greatest outrage of all upon Athens and upon you all. It is this, that when Philip had determined from the very first to do for the Thebans all that he has done, Aeschines, by reporting the exact opposite to you, and so displaying to the world your antagonism to Philip's designs, has brought about for you an increase in the enmity between yourselves and the Thebans, and for Philip an increase in their gratitude. How could a man have treated you more outrageously than this? To the clerk. Now take and read the decrees of Diophantus and Callisthenes. To the jury. For I would have you realize that when you acted as you ought, you were thought worthy to be honored with public thanksgivings and praises, both at home and abroad. But when once you had been driven astray by these men, you had to bring your children and wives in from the country, and to decree that the sacrifice to Heracles should take place within the walls, though it was a time of peace. And in view of this, it is an amazing idea that you should dismiss unpunished a man who even prevented the gods from receiving their worship from you after the manner of your fathers. To the clerk. Read the decree. The decree of Diophantus is read. This decree, men of Athens, was one which your conduct nobly deserved. To the clerk. Now read the next decree. The decree of Callisthenes is read. This decree you passed in consequence of the action of these men. It was not with such a prospect in view that you made the peace and the alliance at the outset, or that you were subsequently induced to insert the words which extended them to your posterity. You expected their action to bring you benefits of incredible value. Aye, and besides this, you know how often, after this, you were bewildered by the report that Philip's forces and mercenaries were threatening Porthmus or Megara. You have not then to reflect contentedly that Philip has not yet set foot in Attica. You have rather to consider whether their action has not given him power to do so when he chooses. It is that danger that you must keep before your eyes, and you must execrate and punish the man who is guilty of putting such power into Philip's hands. Now I am aware that Aeschines will eschew all defence of the actions with which he is charged, and that, in his desire to lead you as far away as possible from the facts, he will enumerate the great blessings which peace brings to all mankind, and will set against them the evils that follow in the train of war. His whole speech will be a eulogy of peace, and in that will consist his defence. But such an argument actually incriminates the defendant further. If peace, which brings such blessings to all other men, has been the source of such trouble and confusion to us, what explanation can be found, except that they have taken bribes, and have cruelly marred a thing by nature so fair? What, he may say, have you not to thank the peace for 300 ships with their fittings, and for funds which remain and will remain yours? In answer to this, you are bound to suppose that, thanks to the peace, Philip's resources too have become far more ample, aye, and his command of arms, and of territory, and of revenues, which have accrued to him to such large amounts. We too have had some increase of revenue, but as for power and alliance, by the establishment of which all men retain their advantages, either for themselves or their masters, ours have been sold by these men, ruined and enfeebled, while Philip's have become more formidable and extensive by far. Thus it is not fair that while Philip has been enabled by their action to extend both his alliances and his revenue, all that would in any case have been ours, as the result of the peace, should be set off against what they themselves sold to Philip. The former did not come to us in exchange for the latter. Far from it! For had it not been for them, not only should we have had the former, as we have now, but we should have had the latter as well. You would doubtless admit, men of Athens, in general terms, that on the one hand, however many and terrible the disasters that have befallen the city, your anger cannot justly be visited upon Aeschines, if none of them has been caused by him, and that, on the other hand, Aeschines is not entitled to be acquitted on account of any satisfactory results that may have been accomplished through the action of others. You must examine the acts of Aeschines himself, and then show him your favour if he is worthy of it, or your resentment, on the other hand, if his acts prove to be deserving of that. How then can you solve this problem fairly? You will do so if, instead of allowing him to confound all questions with one another, the criminal conduct of the generals, the war with Philip, the blessings that flow from peace, you consider each point by itself. For instance, were we at war with Philip? We were. Does anyone accuse Aeschines on that ground? Does anyone wish to bring any charge against him in regard to things that were done in the course of the war? No one whatever. He is therefore acquitted in regard to such matters, and must not say anything about them. For the witnesses and the proofs which a defendant produces must bear upon the matters which are in dispute. He must not deceive you by offering a defence upon points which are not disputed. Take care, then, that you say nothing about the war, for no one charges you with any responsibility for that. Later on, we were urged by certain persons to make peace. We consented. We sent ambassadors, and the ambassadors brought commissioners to Athens, who were to conclude the peace. Once more, does anyone blame Aeschines for this? Does anyone allege that Aeschines introduced the proposal of peace, or that he committed any crime in bringing commissioners here to make it? No one whatever. He must therefore say nothing in regard to the fact that the city made peace, for he is not responsible for that. Then what is your assertion, sir? I may be asked. At what point do your charges begin? They begin, men of Athens, from the time when the question before you was not whether you should make peace or not, for that had already been settled, but what sort of peace you should make. When Aeschines opposed those who took the side of justice, supported for a bribe the hireling mover of the decree, and afterwards, when he had been chosen to receive the oaths, failed to carry out every one of your instructions, destroyed those of your allies who had passed unscathed through the war, and told you falsehoods whose enormity and grossness has never been surpassed either before or since. At the outset, before Philip was given a hearing in regard to the peace, Ctesiphon and Aristodemus took the leading part in the work of deception, but when the time had come for action, they surrendered their role to Philocrates and Aeschines, who took it up and ruined everything. And then, when he is bound to answer for his actions and to give satisfaction for them, like the unscrupulous God-forsaken clerk that he is, he will defend himself as though it were the peace for which he was being tried. Not that he wishes to account for more than is charged against him. That would be lunacy. No, he sees rather that in all his own proceedings no good can be found, that his crimes are his whole history, while a defence of the peace, if it has no other merits, has at least the kindly sound of the name to recommend it. I fear indeed, men of Athens, I fear that unconsciously we are enjoying this peace like men who borrow at heavy interest. The guarantees of its security, the Phocians and Thermopylae, they have betrayed. But be that as it may, it was not through Aeschines that we originally made it, for paradoxical as it may seem, what I am about to say is absolutely true, that if anyone is honestly pleased at the peace, it is the generals who are universally denounced that he must thank for it. For had they been conducting the war as you desired them to do, you would not have tolerated even the name of peace. For peace, then, we must thank the generals. But the perilous, the precarious, the untrustworthy nature of the peace is due to the corruption of these men. Cut him off, then. Cut him off, I say, from all arguments in defence of the peace. Set him to defend his own actions. Aeschines is not being tried on account of the peace. On the contrary, the peace stands discredited owing to Aeschines, and here is evidence of the fact. If the peace had been made, and if no subsequent deception had been practised upon you, and none of your allies had been ruined, who on earth would have been hurt by the peace except in so far as it was inglorious? And for its inglorious character, the defendant in fact shares the responsibility, for he spoke in support of Philocrates. At least no irreparable harm would have been done, whereas now, I believe, much has been done, and the guilt rests with the defendant. End of section 13.